In the early fall of 1982, Chicago woke up to a cold wind, the kind that blows in before the leaves turn red. It felt like a normal day. But within a few hours, the city would be pulled into one of the most haunting, unexplained crime sprees in American history. A mystery that still remains unsolved more than 40 years later. It began with a young girl named Mary Kellerman, just 12 years old, who woke up feeling sick. In your animation, imagine a cheerful preteen girl with brown hair tied in a ponytail, wearing a bright sweatshirt, the kind of kid who looks like she still believes the world is mostly kind. She walked into her family's bathroom, the tiles cold under her feet, and she opened a bottle of extra-strength Tylenol. Simple. Ordinary. Something millions of Americans did every day. She swallowed one capsule. Minutes later, she collapsed to the floor. Her parents thought she fainted. They had no idea this was the beginning of something terrifying, a mass poisoning that would shake the entire nation. At the hospital, doctors rushed around her, confused. She had been perfectly healthy that morning. But nothing they did worked. Mary died before the sun came up. At that moment, no one suspected murder. No one imagined that a killer had already left more traps scattered across the city. That same morning, miles away, a postal worker named Adam Janus arrived home early. Picture a hardworking man in his mid-30s, cartoon-styled with tired eyes and a warm smile, wearing his work jacket. He complained of chest pain. He grabbed Tylenol. He swallowed one. Minutes later, he collapsed, just like Mary. Doctors tried everything. They couldn't save him. His family gathered at the house, devastated and confused. His younger brother Stan, tall, thin, anxious, wearing a flannel shirt in your animation, tried to calm down. His wife, Teresa, a gentle-looking woman with soft features and dark hair, hugged her children. They were grieving. And then, the unthinkable happened. Stan walked into the kitchen. He reached for the same bottle of Tylenol his brother had used. He swallowed one. Teresa followed him minutes later. And within the hour, both were dead. A house full of mourners had just lost 3 people in a single day, all from the same medicine bottle. Police finally realized something impossible was happening. Someone had poisoned Tylenol, America's most trusted painkiller. Detectives were baffled. Why Tylenol? Why random victims? Why Chicago? Investigators spread out across pharmacies and supermarkets. In your animation, show detectives in trench coats walking down aisles, picking up bottles, sealing them in evidence bags. They were looking for anything out of place. Soon, they found it. Some Tylenol capsules were laced with potassium cyanide, a poison that kills in minutes, shutting down cells, suffocating the body from the inside. Someone had opened bottles, slipped poison inside, and returned them to store shelves, without leaving a trace. Chicago went into panic. Parents threw away medicine. Pharmacies emptied overnight. News reporters warned people not to take Tylenol, not even one. Johnson & Johnson, the company behind Tylenol, recalled 31 million bottles. It was the biggest consumer recall in American history. And the killer. They were still out there, watching the chaos they created. The FBI took over the case. Show agents in dark suits, intense expressions, flipping through files. They interviewed store managers, supply truck drivers, warehouse workers, factory staff. Everyone had a theory, but none fit. This crime wasn't personal. It wasn't for money. It wasn't even predictable. The victims had nothing in common except bad luck. Then came a bizarre twist. A man wrote a letter demanding $1 million to stop the poisonings. He claimed he was responsible. But when the FBI tracked him, they discovered something strange. He was lying. He had nothing to do with the murders. He just saw an opportunity. He went to prison for extortion. But the real killer remained unidentified. Weeks turned into months. The trail went cold. Still, the Tylenol murders changed America forever. The government passed new laws. Seal caps, tamper-proof bottles, safety packaging that we take for granted today, all created because one anonymous killer exploited a flaw in the system. You can thank the Tylenol murderer for every safety seal you've ever opened. But the case didn't end there. Detectives chased leads for decades. One suspect after another. A man who made threats. A disgruntled chemist. A former prisoner with the right knowledge. But every path turned into a dead end. Cartoon-style newspaper headlines flash across the screen. Cyanide killer still at large. City in fear. No suspects identified. Even today, the mystery haunts investigators. The killer may have acted alone. They may have died years ago. They may even be living quietly somewhere, blending into everyday life. A supermarket cashier, a delivery driver, a retiree watering their lawn. They might still smile whenever they see a bottle of Tylenol with a safety seal, knowing they changed a nation and no one ever caught them. In your final animated scene, show a dark silhouette in a grocery aisle, an anonymous person walking past rows of sealed medicine bottles. Their face hidden. Their motive unknown. The case is still open. The FBI still allows tips. And America still wonders. Who poisoned Chicago? And why? Until someone steps forward or new evidence emerges, the Tylenol murderer remains one of the most chilling, faceless criminals in US history, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous killers don't use guns or knives. They use trust. Chicago tried to return to normal. Pharmacies restocked shelves. Parents checked medicine cabinets twice. But beneath the surface, the city felt scarred, and investigators knew the killer was still out there. Behind closed doors, the FBI had begun assembling one of the most complex case files in American criminal history. Hundreds of agents pored over leads, telephone tips, anonymous letters, and eyewitness statements. Every day brought new theories. And every night, the unanswered questions grew heavier. One of the biggest mysteries was how the killer slipped poison into Tylenol bottles without being seen. At first, detectives believed the contamination must have happened at the factory. But that theory fell apart quickly. The Chicago bottles came from different factories, different production lines, and different times. It wasn't an inside job. It wasn't an accident. It had to be something else, something far riskier. The killer had walked into multiple stores, opened sealed medicine bottles, filled capsules with cyanide, and placed them back on shelves, without anyone noticing. In your animation, show aisles at night, fluorescent lights buzzing, a shadowy figure moving between shelves, removing a bottle, slipping it into a coat pocket, then returning it minutes later. The killer was calm, methodical, fearless. They knew exactly what they were doing. The FBI created a psychological profile. They believed the killer was organized, highly intelligent, and emotionally detached. Not a rage killer. Not a typical poisoner. Someone who wanted control and chaos, not recognition. But there was another shocking possibility investigators had to consider. What if there was no motive at all? What if this was simply a person experimenting with destruction, watching the city panic while they blended into the terrified crowd? The idea chilled detectives. Meanwhile, Johnson & Johnson faced a nightmare. Tylenol accounted for nearly 20% of their revenue, and trust in the brand had evaporated overnight. Some executives feared the company might not survive. But instead of hiding, they made a bold move. They went on national TV. They apologized. They recalled every bottle in America. 3 days later, the company introduced a revolutionary idea: tamper-proof medicine packaging, glued flaps, shrink wraps, foil seals, triple-layer protection. Something the world had never seen. Your animation can show a factory line rolling out the new sealed bottles, newspapers printing headlines like "Safety Seal introduced nationwide." America watched in awe. For once, a company took responsibility for a crime they didn't commit. Still, the killer was missing. Then came one of the darkest moments in the investigation. A woman in Chicago found her husband unconscious on the floor. He had taken Tylenol just minutes before. For a moment, the city froze. Had the killer struck again? But lab tests shocked investigators. The poison wasn't cyanide. It was rat poison. A completely unrelated case. The city's paranoia had reached a boiling point. People blamed neighbors, co-workers, store clerks, pharmacists, even the victims' own families. Detectives interviewed more than 400 suspects. One man was brought in because he lived near 2 of the stores. Another because he once threatened co-workers. Another because he looked too calm. None matched the profile. Then an odd suspect emerged. A man named James Lewis. He had sent the ransom letter demanding $1 million. At first, the FBI thought he was just an opportunist, and he was. But something about him didn't sit right. In your animation, portray him only with a generalized stylized character. Middle-aged, glasses, neutral clothing, no resemblance to the real person. Investigators discovered that Lewis had a complicated past, financial problems, legal trouble, a history of deception. And he had lived in Chicago before. Lewis insisted he had nothing to do with the poisonings. He claimed the letter was just a scam. But detectives found diagrams, notes, and letters in his home. Documents that looked a lot like planning. Still, there was no proof he ever touched a Tylenol bottle. No fingerprints. No store footage. No eyewitnesses. Nothing that could convict him of murder. He served prison time for the extortion letter, but as for the killings, the case stayed open. Years passed. Then decades. Agents retired. New detectives took over. Every few years, another journalist dug into the case. Books were written. Documentaries aired. Internet theorists picked apart the evidence. But no answer ever emerged. Meanwhile, the families of the victims lived with permanent wounds. Mary Kellerman's parents kept her bedroom untouched. The Janus family, who lost 3 relatives in a single day, became symbols of tragedy in the case. Their faces stayed on newspapers, on courtroom steps, and in interviews for years. In your animation, show soft, respectful silhouettes or distant, generalized figures, never real faces. The world eventually moved on. Safety seals became normal. People trusted medicine again. But the FBI case file remained open, one of the longest running in American history. Then, in the 2000s, investigators tried one last idea. They reopened the evidence, looking for new clues through DNA technology that didn't exist in 1982. They reanalyzed fingerprints, packaging marks, store logs, and chemical residue. They tracked down surviving witnesses. Nothing. It was as if the killer had vanished into thin air. Some agents believe the killer acted only once, a single burst of violence, followed by a lifetime of silence. Others think the killer may have died shortly after 1982. But a few investigators carry a different theory, that the killer is still alive, still ordinary, still blending in somewhere in America. Maybe living alone. Maybe working a quiet job. Maybe walking past shelves of medicine without anyone knowing what they did. And the most haunting detail? If the killer struck today, with modern packaging, cameras, and digital tracking, they would almost certainly be caught. But in 1982, they slipped through a window of opportunity that will never exist again. In your final animation shot, show a medicine aisle late at night, the shelves lined with sealed bottles. A quiet reminder, millions of people buy painkillers every day, but only one person in American history ever turned a simple bottle into a weapon that changed the nation. The case remains unsolved. The killer remains unknown. And the Tylenol murders stand as one of the most chilling reminders that sometimes, the simplest objects can hide the darkest crimes.